Thanks to WoodSolutions for inviting me to present. So Haven HomeSafe is the fourth largest community housing provider in Victoria. We are mostly government funded for our development work, particularly through Homes Victoria. So a big shout out to anybody from Homes Victoria who's listening today. My upfront disclosure, I've been an environmentalist since I was 16 years old, and my focus as head of development is to achieve the best achievable results environmentally for our projects. The E in ESG, the environmental consideration, is very important to me, and we've made it an important part of our business. Our ESG framework is updated annually. There's a lot of work that goes into it to ensure that we are amongst the leaders in ESG in our sector. So for me, the benchmark for a development is not just meeting compliance standards, including environmental, but bettering them wherever possible. As a little background to our development environment, as a not-for-profit community housing provider, we're entrusted with spending taxpayer funds. So our projects are highly regulated and they're required to meet strict government standards. In addition to all the compliance, building surveyors and the NCC, compliance is monitored by government agencies such as Homes Victoria. Despite the extra layers of compliance that we have to adhere to, we also have to develop and deliver projects within very tight cost parameters. Differentiating us from, say, the commercial development industry, unlike commercial developers who can adjust project budgets as they go to market for pre-sales, our budgets are fixed by our funding provider at planning or even pre-planning stage. So if budgets are breached through the design and development process, Haven HomeSafe itself is required to fund the overrun. The project I'm talking to you about today has been completed, I think it was completed about 2 months ago. Horsham is 300 kilometres from Melbourne. So this project had some serious early challenges. It came good in the end, but it was originally contracted in 2022 as a development turnkey delivery that a developer had brought to us. He designed the development and procured a planning permit. The developer went to market and discovered that his contract price to Haven was insufficient to deliver the project. And it then fell to us to find a solution because we'd already been funded. So after months of negotiation, Haven ended up sacking the developer and decided to take over. We then tendered the project and delivered it ourselves. We chose prefab for a number of reasons. With a funding commitment and a permitted site, our challenge was procurement. Horsham, there's really only one local builder in the area with the capability of developing or with delivering a 25-house project. We decided to go to tender and we decided to look at the options available to us, which was modular or traditional construction. We went to 3 Modular, and 3 traditional builders, and Modular won hands down. Um, Tender prices were spread by 28% between the top and the bottom tenderer, or the most expensive and cheapest. Interestingly, not all manufacturing modular providers are cheaper. Oddly, the most expensive and the cheapest tenderers were both modular. We awarded the contract to ARKIT on price and capability. So ARKIT is a timber frame based modular provider. Others in our tender mix were concrete slab and steel frame providers, but ARKIT were most cost competitive, and and the and they really won on price and capability. Our development had a dual requirement, both the modules themselves, the homes themselves, but also all the civil works and infrastructure. So ARKIT brought a general builder's license to the table, which enabled them to offer us a complete package of all civils and landscape plus the modules. So from an ESG value chain perspective, why did we choose modular? And particularly ARKIT, they brought architect design capabilities. They met our ESG requirements with a timber frame solution, and I'll go into this more later on in this presentation, bringing environmental benefits. Their production methodology enabled them to produce up to 8 modules simultaneously in the factory. And their system was they build in batches, they deliver to site, and then they go on to the next batch. With the modules fully completed in the factory, one of the issues facing prefab generally is proving to your funding body, whether it's a bank or in our case, a government funder, that you can verify the ownership of all the kit of parts that goes into a modular build. We were able to solve that problem with ARKIT and solve it to the satisfaction of Homes Victoria. So that was very important to us. They deliver 1 or 2 modules per truck, and this project for 25 homes, 1 and 2 bedroom homes, was fully delivered over an 11-month timescale, which was great for us because when we do get funded, we also get a very strict timetable to deliver within by the government. In terms of the overall benefit that I'm going to be talking about today, low carbon construction is a key. So I'll now get to the environmental benefits that we saw in ARKIT's offer. So the first is a reduction in overall waste. Waste, as you probably know, is a big problem in construction. And these results demonstrate from a University of New South Wales study of multiple builders, both traditional and modular, that there are significant savings in waste with a modular build. The second is the carbon benefit. So a little bit of my perspective on carbon and construction. We're in a world where CO2 emissions are already affecting global economic and human security. With unchecked CO2 emissions driving climate change, the threat is to our national economy and raises the cost globally of disaster response, as we've seen recently, and fuels migration crises and conflicts. In Australia, a survey in 2023 showed that 71% of Australians to be fairly or very concerned about climate change. But if you go to any pub and ask somebody there, they'll say, no worries, mate, just another day in paradise, because that's the Australian way. My perspective is that we need to develop a sense of urgency because, as Bill Gates said, it's one of the most urgent and most complex problems the world faces, and we need to act quickly to avoid the worst possible outcomes. So my takeaway is that if one is a development or construction decision maker, you've got choices for the materiality of the construction that you go with, and timber is unquestionably the better choice environmentally, and I'm going to prove that to you today. In terms of construction and CO2 globally, you can split the construction component of global CO2 emissions into two. There are the operational benefits of the energy use in buildings over the building's lifespan, and there's the energy and emissions involved in the construction of the building itself. So what's the difference and how does that affect the choices that we make? Well, it's really a time impact. If 11% of emissions from building construction come from embodied carbon, why should we focus on it? And the reason is because of the time frame. The carbon released into the atmosphere, if you make better materiality choices, you're affecting a time frame within the frame of the construction itself. So it's a direct and immediate benefit environmentally, whereas operational emissions, the oven you choose, the dishwasher you choose, the refrigerator you choose, or the building itself and the insulation and so forth, the building lifespan might be 50 years or more. So my question in my own mind was, at the rate of CO2 increase that I showed you before, which is more important to make an immediate impact or just rely on the building's operation? And there are things that we can do to achieve an immediate impact. And we've gone ahead with some original research to prove how much impact that accounts for. So we did a study together with an environmental consultant called Arc Resources. And we basically studied two cases. The as-built design, which was a timber frame modular building on screw piles. And we compared it to one of the other tenderers, which was a waffle slab with steel purlins as the frame. And what we said to our consultant was, we want you to compare and contrast the two construction systems, frame only. So in other words, we've limited it to just the structural frame. Everything else, the cladding, the linings, the flooring, everything else being equal. But how impactive would a timber frame building be against a steel and concrete building in terms of carbon emissions? And this shows the results. So the second line, the total of a timber frame was 5 times less, 5.5 times less than the carbon impact of a steel and concrete building. And remember, this is just this was focused on one of our units, one of 25 units. So what you can see here is that there's, to put it into kind of layman's terms, it requires over a hectare of pine forest, which is about 1,100 trees, 1 year to sequester 23 tonnes of carbon. So for 25 homes, timber frame on screw piles versus a steel and concrete build, the equivalent carbon differential between the two is 475 round-trip flights between London and New York. It's very significant, and my point is that the choices we make as developers, designers, and builders carry very significant consequences to our environmental footprint, and those consequences are encapsulated within a short time frame during the time frame of the build. If we all made environmentally sustainable choices with embodied emissions, we could have an enormous impact on carbon in our environment. So how did that relate to the other major factor in all developments, which is the development cost? So this slide gives you the comparative cost from our tender of an in situ steel frame on concrete slab versus a modular timber frame on screw piles. So not only did we achieve superior environmental outcome, our economic outcome was far superior, saving 28% on cost. So talking about timber applications more generally, in construction, I believe that compared to other building typologies, Class 1 and Class 2 residential projects, which require relatively short floor spans, they're mostly between 4 and 6 meters, and relatively low live loads compared to offices or schools. Engineered timber structures bring the environmental and cost benefits, but they also bring excellent structural benefits, and they're more than capable of coping with a wide variety of housing typologies. And I just want to go through some of the projects that I personally have been involved in, more in the Class 2 space, to show you what's possible. So whether it's a vertical extension, timber brings lower weight, which is often what's necessary to create developments in a building's air rights. As an architect, I acknowledge that steel and concrete are essential to many projects, but for residential, whether it's vertical air rights or mid-rise, timber is a sensible and sustainable choice and brings both cost and environmental benefits. Another project, most housing, that goes up can and should, in my view, be built in timber. Steel may be required as a structural element, but if one considers a hybrid frame, in most cases, the choice of using timber will save tons and tons of carbon and will also save money on most projects. It's an easy choice to make. Timber construction is well understood, well supported and supplied, and it's a choice that we as developers and designers can make that has a real impact. Like any construction system, timber requires careful engineering and detailing. For Class 2 buildings in particular, of course, one has to deal with fire, acoustics, cladding and services design. And it's really important, therefore, to have consultants who understand how timber goes together and how to meet all the requirements and get the results that timber can bring. But if due consideration is paid to the particular requirements of a timber system, one can achieve highly successful results, often saving time because of the ability for timber to be built in components in a factory and to be brought to site as a kit of parts. This particular building, for example, was completed in 2014. Interestingly, a lot of opinion surrounds the use of timber in construction, and people often say, well, what about shrinkage? What about water? What about fire? The building's not as valuable or not as sustainable from a usage point of view, an operational point of view, as a concrete building. This particular building proved the lie to those claims. And in fact, as a demonstration of the timber structure's long-term value, specific interviews were conducted with the building managers of this building who took over when handover occurred. And the interviews were conducted 10 years after handover. The managers reported better overall performance for the building than many of their concrete frame buildings, with no issues whatsoever with the timber structure. And in fact, their on-site managers had no idea that the building had a timber frame. So in terms of long-term capability, timber is just as good, if not better, than a concrete frame, in my view, for the right projects. So my message to any of you who are designers or developers or builders is that our collective decisions as design and construct professionals can have an enormous potential environmental impact and should be in our list of considerations when we make our materiality choices. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jack. And thank you to WoodSolutions for allowing me to present our projects and a bit of an introduction to what we do. My name is Craig Chapman, Director of RKit. This is the first ever project. We've been interested in timber since about 2010. This is a project that was delivered up to the Grampians area, and it was very much this investigation in panelised or kit apart approach. And you can probably see from this photo that there's a vertical element, which was a wall panel that was assembled off site, which is 900 millimetres wide, about 3.3 metres tall, and that was built in Melbourne as a structural solution. So it was a timber structure. The external cladding was made of timber shorts, which then made it quite a cost-effective proposition to a cladding solution, because shorts are very difficult for most timber merchants to sell. And then there was an internal lining, which was plywood. And what that meant is an overall system, a one trade or a carpenter could install this out on site, because each of the panels was quite lightweight. So it was quite an efficient way, and good start and good learnings from this project to where we currently are now. Which is, there's been a great diversity of projects that we've been involved with, again, over the last 15 years. And what I've noticed is that really over the last 5 to 7 years in particular, there's been this maturing of the market. And so there's been local government, state government, now interstate governments, together with community housing providers, really looking at their procurement models and investigating MMC opportunities within delivering their projects and the advantages that go along with that. From those early beginnings to where we are now, we very much still offer a kit parts approach to probably about 20 to 25% of our projects, and then the balance are volumetric builds. And then along the journey, as the business has grown, we've also developed up other products as well, which I'll slightly touch on a little bit later, that has a look at other housing solutions. Some of the client pool and architects that we've worked with, although we are architects and we have in-house architects that work here, there is a important, I guess, learnings and offerings that we can offer others, and so we don't exclusively build all of our projects. But these are, again, some of the clients that we've worked with, both local, state agencies, as well as community housing providers. In our manufacturing facility, our workshop and studio, we're based in Sunshine. Anybody here is welcome anytime that they want, but we have our in-house designers, as well as people that facilitate the construction, so site managers, project managers, construction manager, as well as full-time carpenters. So everything gets built off-site in this our controlled environment. We've got some indoor construction activities every space, and every now and again we do have to rely on a bit of a hard stand to be able to fabricate, but mostly it's indoor off-site construction. Some of the benefits, some of the early benefits, is really about combining, particularly the design and construction company, that combine the services of that being the digital design, whereby it's a software system and information packages, together with the process or processes behind our manufacturing, that being our QA systems, our DFMA systems and solutions, and that being the physical product. We're able to manage, fabricate, install and complete our projects, our clients' projects, to a high level of accuracy and more importantly, certainty. The sectors that we get involved with, it's very much that housing market, and that's how we started, and that one-off bespoke architectural response. We do design and construct a few passive house projects. We've got one under construction at the moment in Northcote, which is a new build, and we still participate in the additions and renovation markets, as well as the one-off bespoke homes. Our housing solution that we've evolved. We've got an entity called Multi-Kit, which looks at that low carbon mid-rise space, preset, which is a social and affordable housing space. And we've just developed up a solution for secondary dwellings off the back of the relaxing of some of the town planning requirements for up to 60 square metre dwelling as a secondary dwelling. We've designed and built quite a few classroom, early learning centres, libraries, etc. And we also get involved with small-scale office buildings. The processes behind how we deliver the projects and design and also manufacture the buildings, there's three general approaches, and that being fully volumetric dwellings. That's where, building. That's where we complete as much as we possibly can in the factory environment. Then we've got a panelised approach, and so that's big, for want of a better term, Lego sections that are again completed off-site. And then we've got a hybrid approach whereby there is a mix between on-site, fairly conventional activities and also a modular or panels as well. And so that project on the right-hand side was a project in Northcote, which was as a design response to a heritage overlay, and where there needed to be some contextual on-site brickwork and a pitch form, hence the outcome there. And yes, some of the products and projects that we've been involved with over the years, and as I mentioned, it's evolving. It's quite an exciting space to be in at the moment. The efficiencies of the benefits of modular construction and MMC is really about some program efficiencies, and I think Jack highlighted that earlier. There was this 11-month construction program to start to finish with the Horsham project. There's speed, quality of construction, and really by removing some of those construction activities from the site and placing them into our controlled factory environment, there's a proved positive impact and safe efficiencies and quality behind the build. Also, what this slide does demonstrate is that there's decoupling of what can happen or concurrent construction with what's happening on site versus what can happen in the factory environment. So you get this overlap of construction activities that happens at the same time. And also reinforcing Jack's earlier slide about waste, there is a big benefit with construction waste, particularly in timber construction, which construction waste as a whole accounts for 40% of landfill, and timber prefab greatly reducing this construction waste. And we undertook an independent assessment of our project recently, which confirmed that approximately 3% of all of the waste material went back into landfill, with the balance being able to be recycled. As a precursor to the Horsham project, we've delivered about 130 houses over the last 4 to 5 years for Homes Victoria, and through this we've established a few different typologies that we've worked on. There's been a suite of 1 to up to 7 bedrooms, but it's really been this emphasis on 1 to 3 bedrooms that we've delivered for Homes Victoria and throughout the state. So that's enabled us to be able to then offer design solutions that then fully comply with not only Homes Vic requirements, so they've got their own overlay specification requirements at the time under the previous NCC, National Construction Code. All of these houses needed to comply with the 7-star energy rating, as opposed to, at the time, it was the 6-star requirement, and then they needed to achieve a gold standard under the livable housing guidelines as well. So we've had this suite of designs, and we've delivered these over the last 4 to 5 years. So it's been a great precursor to the Horsham Haven Home Safe project, which leads me on to this slide. So there were 25 dwellings. There was an existing town planning permit in place for this that we inherited after the tender was awarded. There were some additional, objectives that we needed to put into the project. So Haven had their own requirements regarding compliance to livable housing guidelines and the silver standard, which this wasn't designed to. So we had to take that information and adopt it. As well as being a modular solution, it meant that the original design was designed as a concrete slab on ground. but we needed to elevate that slightly to allow for the subfloor construction. And what that really meant is we needed to maintain that stepless entries between the car parking spaces into the dwellings. And by the design actually lent itself quite well by raising the building up. We've just been able to have a ramp from the car park areas back up into the dwellings to maintain this stepless entrance approach, as well as some internal readjustments and some value management options. We provided the external cladding. And really this, some earlier perspectives of the project, and there was this idea about, which again we inherited, but we worked with and embellished this idea about this central driveway, which was quite open and public to the pedestrians and also the occupants, being the car park area and the walkway areas, and then it was offset against the more secluded private open spaces which were at the rear of the dwellings. With modular construction, then it's about, and what we try to maintain is definitely the design integrity. So working with our architectural team to maintain that, and then understanding the fundamentals of what we can deliver to the site and how we're going to approach the prefab or the offsite construction solution behind that. So this is just an early diagram that starts to illustrate how we would develop up typologies and building types, and then break this apart into various different building elements to be able to deliver this to site. There is an understanding with every single one of our sites is that there's this assessment that's done early on to be able to understand what we can deliver, being this project was a modular construction. And so we, this doesn't apply to our panelised approach, but we're given the constraints of where the site was, which is in Horsham. It was better for us to be able to deliver these as a modular build, and very much the design lent itself to that. But there are some constraints, I guess, of physical constraints of sizes of what you can put on the back of a truck. And this was more or less a development of those ideas and how we would build the buildings. This is an early documentation drawing. But it was early on, we made the assessment we were going to deliver this over 3 tranches of about 8 dwellings each tranche. And what that really enabled us to do is to, on the far right-hand side of this diagram, they were the first buildings that we delivered. Whilst we were building the second tranche, or finishing the second tranche off in our workshop in Sunshine, we were able to start the landscaping, the civil works were all complete, but the driveway works, the car parking, the ramps, etc. So there was this idea about ongoing concurrent construction between off-site and also on-site. There's a big emphasis in what we do in our shop drawing world, or shop drawing land. So a lot of time and energy spent in this because it's a critical part to being able to manufacture our buildings. And what that really means is that we just minimise any clashes, or we map everything out in the BIM world to then make sure that it's very efficient in the construction world and everything's considered. So there's just a couple of short little diagrams to illustrate that, and some happy snaps for the project under construction. So this is the beginning of a few bases of subframes going together. Some of the sections of walls that are being built, again, concurrently. The idea about these are being built at the same time as the wall frames are being built. Some assembly of both of these components come together, mixed in with the roof design. A few more action shots of it all coming together, and a series of a few of the buildings together, just with the external cladding being finalised before they make their way on the back of a truck. And these were interesting objects. They were really assisted with some of the performance of the buildings, and particularly with the daylight, given the orientation of some of these dwellings. Each one of these pop-up roof elements were facing north, so they were all, despite the orientation of some of the buildings, at least there was a good abundance of natural daylight coming in through these pop-up roofs. So quite a lot of time was spent in making sure that the overlap, or the male-female junction between these pop-up roofs and the top of the single level building was all designed so it was seamlessly installed on site. And these are just a detail of the pre-plumbed, pre-finished roofing and the lifting lugs to be able to enable them to be installed. And buildings sitting on the back of a truck and making their way up to Horsham. It's an aerial photograph, obviously, and that's more or less towards the latter stages of the build. I do have a video coming up, which is installing some of these projects, but you can see what I was talking about before with the buildings at the bottom of the screen have been delivered in a few different tranches, and then there was the continuation of some of those concreting works, landscape works, fencing works, etc. So it was a great site to work on. It was very accessible, which is amazing, and that's sometimes why we need to panelise our projects if we can't get big cranes and big trucks to the particular site. But this was a good project from an accessibility point of view. Short video. So we had a great media day. Homes Victoria were there with the local member and also Harriet Shing, the Minister of Housing, and they came out to actually see our facility and see the building under construction, which was great. And just some of the final stages of a few of the modules being installed. And a bit more of the finished product. And then just finishing with some of one of our BIM models and the highlighting some of the amazing timber work that went into it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair, and thanks to WoodSolutions for the opportunity to provide today's presentation. So I think we've had a really good overview from both Jack and Craig about the benefits of using timber. Obviously, the carbon benefits and the environmental benefits of using timber over other products. So I'm going to talk a bit about today about forest and chain of custody certification, as well as sustainable forest management. So a lot of us like using wood and forest-based products, but we sometimes question the sustainability of that wood. Obviously, wood comes from trees, and often there's questions about that sustainability aspect of it. So I'm going to cover off on a bit of that. So just starting off, I work for an organisation called Responsible Wood. So Responsible Wood is the national governing body for PEFC. So you can see on that first slide there's a few logos. So PEFC, or the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, is actually the world's largest forest certification scheme, with almost 300 million hectares of forest certified globally under PEFC. And Responsible Wood is a national governing body, as I said before, for PEFC for Australia and New Zealand. And we actually have about 17 million hectares of forest certified in Australia and New Zealand. So Responsible Wood is actually the largest forest certification scheme in the Southern Hemisphere. Also, the Green Building Council of Australia. So we work very closely with the Green Building Council of Australia, and under our certification scheme, we actually receive Green Star ratings from the Green Building Council of Australia. So a lot of our processors, manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers are quite proud of the fact that their products, which are certified through Responsible Wood, also carry the Green Building Council of Australia Green Star ratings as well. So Responsible Wood is also an organisation, a standards development organisation, and we're actually accredited by Standards Australia to write and develop standards. And I'm going to talk about our two standards in a minute. We've got two standards, one for sustainable forest management and one for chain of custody certification, and they are actually Australian standards. So we are a standards development organisation accredited by Standards Australia to write and develop standards. The Responsible Wood logo or trademark is also a licensed trademark with the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission as well, or otherwise known as the ACCC. So look, both Jack and Craig have given a really good overview about the benefits of using timber, particularly around the carbon benefits. So about half the dry weight of wood, for example, is about 50% biogenic carbon. So if you have, for example, a 100-kilogram dining room table at home, about half the dry weight of that, about 50 kilos, is actually biogenic carbon. So obviously wood comes from trees. Trees, as we know, are the ultimate carbon sequestration machine, so they absorb and sequester carbon. And so if you're using forest wood-based products, you're actually absolutely helping to mitigate climate change. Something that wasn't mentioned before about using wood is the health benefits of working and living amongst wood. So, for example, a lot of hospitals, schools, mental health institutions, for example, are actually using wood and timber in their building because it actually does help with reducing stress levels in people as well. So there's many health benefits aside from all the environmental benefits of using timber as well. And the big thing I want to talk about today is how forest certification ensures that wood and that timber has come from sustainably managed forests that actually remain forests. So I mentioned right at the start that Responsible Wood is a standards development organisation. So what we basically do is we write and develop standards. So we have two standards. We have one for sustainable forest management, and that's for the 17 million hectares, as I mentioned before, of forest in Australia and New Zealand that is certified by Responsible Wood. So in that slide there, you can see at the top of the slide there's about 4 pictures there of some forests. You can quite clearly see in the background there's trees in the background. So those photos are all taken from forests that have been harvested sustainably. So forest wood-based products have been removed from those forests. And under our certification scheme, the number one tenet is that the forest must remain a forest. So absolutely no deforestation takes place. So all of the forest managers and the forest growers must ensure that deforestation does not take place. So unfortunately, there's quite a bit of misinformation around certified sustainable forestry and deforestation. So forest certification was established about 25 to 30 years ago as a means to actually halt deforestation. So absolutely the trees must regrow, they must regenerate. Deforestation is where there's a permanent land use change. So for example, where a forest is cleared for some other permanent land use like agriculture or urban expansion. So not only do the forest managers need to ensure that the forests regrow, regenerate, and the biodiversity and cultural heritage values are maintained and enhanced, they must also align themselves with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You can see the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal wheel up there in the right-hand corner of that slide. So, for example, the forest manager must demonstrate that they're treating their workers fairly, that they're paying them a decent wage, and also that the forests provide a good livelihood to local communities as well. So that's our Sustainable Forest Management Standard, which, as I said before, we covers about 17 million hectares of forest in Australia and New Zealand. And then we have our chain of custody standard or chain of custody certification. And that's for processors, manufacturers, wholesalers and retailers. And what that basically does is that essentially tracks the forest wood-based product all the way from the forest, all the way through that supply chain, so all the way through that processing, manufacturing, wholesaling and retailing process. I've just got a couple of well-known products in the bottom right-hand corner there. So the Woolies paper bag. So the Woolies paper bag with the PFC logo on it, for example, that's come from, the fibre source to manufacture that paper bag has come from forests that have been grown in Australia. It's also been manufactured in Australia as well. And the same with, for example, solvent toilet paper and tissue paper as well. So at the end of the day, if the consumer purchases products that have been certified under Responsible Wood or PFC, they can be assured that it's come from a forest that remains a forest and has also followed an ethical and responsible supply chain as well. So as I said before, just give you an overview about forest management. So forest management in Australia. So broadly speaking, Australia has two I guess, commercial forest types that often get talked about. So we have what we call our native forests and also our plantations. A little known fact is that Australia is actually the 7th most forested country in the world. So it's interesting when I travel overseas, a lot of people are quite surprised to hear that. They think of Australia as the outback and being quite an arid country, but we are actually the 7th most forested country in the world with about 134 million hectares of forests. So in the top right-hand corner, there's a little image of our native forests, and again, all these photos are taken in responsible wood certified forests. So quite clearly, you can see those forests have been harvested. They're obviously regenerated and growing, and they're actually thriving forests. So that image of the native forest up there, that's a native or a natural forest. And we have about 132 million hectares of native or natural forest in Australia. And the vast majority of our high quality hardwood timber comes from our native forests. When I talk about high quality hardwood timber, I'm talking about things like flooring, decking, and also engineered wood products, which Jack and Craig touched on a little bit before as well. So those engineered wood products have similar strength properties to steel and concrete as well. And then we have our plantations. So we have two sort of major plantation types in Australia. So on the left-hand side of your screen there, you can see the softwood plantation or the pine plantation. The vast majority of product that comes from those is used for house framing, also pulp, paper, and packaging as well. And the bottom right-hand corner, there's an image of a hardwood plantation or a eucalypt plantation. And they're generally grown in Australia. The vast majority of our hardwood plantations are generally grown for about 10 to 12 years. There is some sawlog material, some high-quality sawlog material that's derived from our hardwood plantations, but the vast majority of product derived from our hardwood plantations is used for high-quality photo paper and printing paper and magazine paper and that type of thing as well. So these four images here, these four images are taken from a native or a natural forest up on the north coast of New South Wales. They're all taken from the same location over about an 8-year period. So in Australia, just by law, the forest manager must regrow and regenerate the forest. So there's very strict legislation, regulations, and codes of practice that govern the way that forestry takes place. That's even before certification comes into play. So, for example, image number 1 there, you can quite clearly see trees have been removed from the forest, but a certain number of trees are retained per hectare, and those trees need to be retained under the legislation, regulations, and associated codes of practice. So those trees are retained, for example, for habitat. So there might be habitat for species like koalas, possums, parrots, and other tree-dwelling species. And they're also retained for seed dispersal, also for natural seed dispersal as well. So after a native forest harvesting operation, a light burn is introduced, and that burn actually reduces the fuel load on the ground. It also creates what we call a mineral ash seed bed as well on the forest floor. And the smoke from that burn actually induces seed fall in the eucalypt seed pods. So they actually disperse their seeds. And quite clearly see images 2, 3, and 4. The trees do regrow and they do regenerate. So the forest must retain what it was like before it was actually harvested. So it must replicate the forest prior to harvesting as well. So the sustainable forestry cycle. So essentially certified sustainable forestry ensures, as I said earlier, the number one tenet is that the trees do regrow, they do regenerate. There's been quite a bit of talk before earlier, particularly from Jack and Craig, about the benefits of using timber from a carbon sequestration perspective. So essentially once trees are replanted, they regrow, and young regrowth trees, so regrowing trees, actually absorb more carbon from the atmosphere than older trees. So a sustainably managed forest actually absorbs more carbon from the atmosphere than an older forest. So that's been scientifically proven, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change actually supports that as well. So by using forest wood-based products, whether it be paper or timber, you absolutely are supporting mitigating climate change. So it's actually a really good thing for the environment, and it's obviously part of that whole circular economy as well. So with regard to the circular economy and as defined by the United Nations, it's basically a system that emphasises the reuse of products instead of discarding those products and extracting new resources. So certified sustainable forestry is absolutely part of the circular bioeconomy, and we've heard a bit of talk today about the environmental, social, and governance aspects as well. So from an environmental perspective, we sort of talk quite a bit about that. From a social perspective, under the responsible wood standards, there's quite a bit of, for example, stakeholder engagement that takes place, and the forest manager also must demonstrate that they maintain and enhance cultural heritage values as well. And from a governance perspective, for example, our standards actually align with the ISO, the International Standards Organisation standards, and also under the Montreal Process Criteria and Indicators, which is the globally accepted indicators for the sustainable management of our forests. And we work very closely with a lot of organisations out there that are actually trying to enhance their ESG reporting. So basically, forest certification, what it does, it basically goes over and above the legislative regulatory environment that governs forestry, particularly in Australia, where forestry has very strict legislation and regulations. So the final slide, I know we're a little bit pressed for time here. So the final slide here, these are essentially the take-home messages. So the number one tenet, if a consumer purchases a product, whether it be a piece of timber, paper, cardboard, as long as it's got either the responsible or the PFC logo on it, those consumers can be assured that it has come from a forest that is still a forest, and there's absolutely no deforestation that's taken place along that supply chain. I've talked briefly, as of Jack and Craig, about the carbon and climate mitigation benefits of using forest or wood-based products, and also purchasing products that are certified by Responsible and PFC also ensures that the consumer's purchasing products that have come from a globally recognised international scheme as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. That's been an amazing presentation, chock-a-block full of information. Unfortunately, probably means we've missed the opportunity to sort of do some question time. It's just a bit after 12 at the moment. I know people need to move on to other things. I noticed some of those questions we got there. We'll pass those on to the speakers just to hopefully sort of answer for you afterwards. I just want to mention that our next presentation for our next webinar will be on Tuesday, the 4th of March at 11 a.m. and it'll be focused on making of the Northcote House, which was one of our winners of the recent Australian Timber Design Awards. So I'd like to thank all the presenters today. It's been a fantastic webinar with lots of great information shared, and also thank all those people for attending today. This will be actually my last webinar I'll be delivering. I'm retiring at the moment, so I've been with Wood-Solutions for 16 years now, but it's been a great sort of time with them. But Boris and Kylan will be doing the webinars from now on. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again hopefully on the 4th of March for the next webinar. Thank you.